When somebody thinks of music, they oftentimes think of good times healing. We can have positive associations, negative associations, but not in a bad way. But when it comes to the people who play those things, I think oftentimes, especially to those that aren't a musician, assume that it's like this thing we love and are passionate about. And while that's true, I think it can also become something that's very damaging to not only just kind of like your identity, but your mental health. What's up, everyone? My name is Nikki Hiron. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to my channel. If you are new, if you are returning, thank you so much. If you're new on this channel, we talk about a bunch of things, including music, life. I sing a little bit. I like anime. I don't know. Whatever else I feel like posting that day, because we are not going to be creatively restricted here. No, we are not. But today I'm going to be talking about a topic that I feel like I don't hear enough about. We're going to talk about how music sort of destroyed my mental health and how I'm learning to create a better relationship with it so I can love it the way I originally intended to, and the reason why I started playing music in the first place, and the reason why I wanted to be a musician. But I feel like this is something that isn't talked about a lot. So through kind of bits of my story, I'm going to talk about how damaging it can be sometimes if your relationship with music is bad, but also just the facets of music that being a musician just suck and can really take a toll on you. And I actually looked up some statistics that kind of like blew my mind. Apparently there was a study done, and a recent survey of 1,500 independent musicians found that 73% have symptoms of a mental illness. And in this article by psychiatry.org, they say this could be in part due to the physical and psychological challenges of the profession. And I would agree with this, because in my experience, a lot of the time, if you don't learn how to separate your identity or your self-worth from being a musician or just playing music, it can really cause you to feel a bunch of things when you go through certain experiences. I feel like I really want to use this on my channel and in general to cultivate healing for those who play music or those who know someone who does, and about how this is the kind of a taboo topic. Like, we don't talk about this enough. We don't talk about the fact that when you are told you have to have thick skin in the music industry, and when your song's not good enough, and when this isn't, that it's like can literally hurt you as a person and can really damage your self-esteem. So here's kind of a bit of my story about how my relationship with music kind of changed and how it really impacted me mentally. When I was young, I was exposed to Elvis Presley, and I always wanted to be a singer. And when I saw Elvis, I was like, that's what I want to do. And throughout my whole life, I've kind of strived to be this performer, star-studded person. And as I went through my years, and especially when I hit high school, I realized that there were so much more things that I was different. Like, and that's not in like a pick-me kind of way. There were certain things I just wasn't good at, or there's some things that like I didn't know how to practice, or I wasn't in lessons, or so on and so forth. And I remember being told I wasn't a good singer, and that like blowing my mind, because my whole life I had thought I was a good singer. So in high school it was like, oh. And so I got voice lessons and I got better, but I never had a solo in choir, which is crazy now because I feel like as a vocalist, like I've really improved. But it really damaged me for a long period of time, because I would think like, how am I ever going to get to where I want to get? And it was almost like my dreams were kind of destroying my teenage life. But yeah, and there's certain instances where, like, of course, as a musician, you have to have a little bit of grit here and there. But at some point, it's like, okay, how much are you willing to take until it actually is damaging to you? And you forget why you even started playing music in the first place. Because when it's all ego-driven, and when it's all, let's just have thick skin and take shit from people all the time, you don't know where the line is. You don't know how to set boundaries. And I think that's the biggest thing. And that was really tough for me, because I was willing to take any opportunity I could get. And if I didn't take an opportunity, I would feel even worse. Like, I'm not trying hard enough if I wanted this bad enough. And part of that too is I had undiagnosed ADHD for a lot of years. But I feel like, we talk about high-profile artists always having, like, not always, we talk about high-profile artists having mental health issues, but we don't talk about just the process of being a musician in general, even just growing up, or, with that love for it, and how that kind of, like, eventually turns into this weird toxic relationship almost with music. And that's definitely what happened with me. And through high school, I was in jazz band. It was a little bit more positive then, and I started to like it a little bit more. But there were certain things I just wasn't good at. and I would feel bad about it, like reading like I could read music, but I hated reading rhythms, and it's like my brain would find a way around it, so I would just sight read rhythms a lot of the time, or not sight read, I would learn by ear the rhythms, and I can count rhythms, but it was just really difficult for me my whole life, and it's something I felt bad about, so I found a shortcut, and that's what I would do, and nobody ever knew. It was kind of like this big secret I feel like I held, but although if I sat down with a rhythm, I could read it, but I felt bad about it, and I think that was kind of the first facet that damaged me. And when I did this program through a college when I was in high school, and this really fucked me up, and it was like one of the most defining moments, I feel like, me kind of going into this really negative space with my music. So I started songwriting when I was in high school, and I really, really loved it. I was just going for it, and I was writing songs all the time. I was like obsessed with it, and kind of discovering this part of myself. My band teacher he's always been amazing, and he helped me kind of go into this program. It was like a summer camp type thing for this music industry program through a college. And I ended up getting like a full scholarship to it, which was really cool because my parents didn't pay for it. And so I go to this program, and it's all cool, all dandy, and I'm meeting kids that go to I remember this one kid went to a really prestigious high school, and he's like, yeah, my vocal coach, and yeah, my guitar teacher, and I was like, I don't have any of those. And I remember crying and begging my mom for piano lessons again or voice lessons, but my mom couldn't afford it, and it wasn't her fault. She just couldn't do it. And so there was a barrier, especially when it came to just buying instruments. And I remember talking to these people at lunch, and I was like, dang, this kid can afford everything, and that's why I'm not good enough. Which I don't know if that's the case always, but it definitely helps to have an upper edge and be able to get lessons when you're young. That's not. And I had piano lessons from my neighbor for a period of time. So that was kind of the first moment I realized such a class difference when it came to being a musician. And that kind of was a shock because there was a barrier. I had a barrier that I felt was in front of me. And while I was still grateful when I was younger, I did trades to watch my neighbor's dog for piano lessons, and that's how I learned piano. I'm really grateful for that, but it was still really hard for me, I think, to grasp that and just seeing that class difference and even people I remember were in bands and they were playing shows, and I was like, dang, I don't ever play shows, and I felt really bad about myself. I felt like I was so behind, I wasn't good enough, and that there was nothing I could do about it. And that was the hardest part, I think, with that situation, but not the camp. So fast forward, we end up having to write a song. It was a really great experience, and I'm really grateful for it, but we had to write a song, and then we had a local DJ from a radio station come in and review it. I don't even remember what he said, to be honest. I remember it really messed me up because I think he was like, oh, it's not, I don't know, it was kind of I don't know if it was a mean comment, but it wasn't positive, and it changed my whole perception of my song because I actually thought it was an okay song. It was one of those roundabout comments. He gave all the other people a lot of praise. So it's kind of there's me, and I remember I just was so gutted and I just wanted to cry. That was really the first time I think I started to get this obsession with I need to be good enough in music, and kind of started to forget the love and why I played it. And something I've been asking myself recently is, how do you balance the love for music and balance the discipline that you have to have for it? And sometimes I think that's by reframing, and that's through making these things practice more of a positive thing versus I have to practice. And I'm still figuring it out, but anyway, I remember that. And then I remember, I go to college, and I'm in the music business program. And this was kind of the first time I felt a little bit more respected as a musician, and that's because I knew kind of a lot compared to a lot of my fellow students, which was weird because I wasn't used to that. But I had a duo partner, that was my first gigs. We played together, and we had a lot of fun. But then some stuff ended up happening, and I don't know what changed his perception, but I could tell he was getting really frustrated with me as a musician. And I remember this comment, I'll remember it probably for the rest of my life, because I think it literally changed me, as dramatic as that sounds. But we were going to the studio, and I remember he said, you are good at the business and I'm good at the music. And I was like, what does that mean? And forever I would push back on being good at other things or being too business savvy because I was like, oh crap, like my music. And it would like come in to like almost stop me from being good at other things. And so at that point, when I talk about identity as a musician, it's almost like I was so rigid in that I couldn't explore anything else creatively. I wouldn't allow myself to be anything else other than a musician because in my head, if I was good at other things, then I wasn't good at being a musician. And that really shook me. And I remember like him getting upset with me when I would make mistakes and so on and so forth. And I remember some other comments that were made, like kind of insinuating that this other person that was going to go on before us was better than us in the show. And they were like, oh, like we have to go on after them. Oh my gosh, like we're going to suck. Like, Nikki, you suck. I felt like that. And those just experiences kind of like started to really take a toll on me. You know, eventually I could just tell they didn't want to be a part of that project, which is okay. So I ended up finishing that project. And after that, I kind of had this thing in my head, and I worked through therapy a lot. Like I said, this might sound dramatic, and I know like, trauma's weird, y'all. Somebody can say something to you, and it might just and also through this, I was also in an abusive relationship, so I'll preface that too. So that didn't help my self-esteem, so it was very easy to kind of change my perception. And yeah, so it was pretty easy to change my perception then. I'm much better now, but this is when my relationship with music started to really get damaged, and my relationship with jazz music specifically, because I was playing jazz music at the time. And I really loved jazz. Like, I was in jazz band in high school, and it slowly started to just eat away at me where I just didn't feel like a real musician. I didn't feel like a real singer. I didn't feel like a real songwriter. A lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of just feeling really shitty about myself because I wasn't doing the same things or I wasn't getting as many streams, and I was so obsessed with like this concept. And then like in college when I was playing jazz, I remember this is when I started to get into like improvisation and into the rule book and into those types of things. And, you know, I was in a jazz combo, which was a really positive environment. I really liked it. But that being said, I think I realized now I wasn't interested in like memorizing the rule book. I didn't want to memorize standards. I wanted to play the saxophone. I wanted to play jazz, but the issue with jazz, especially nowadays, is you can't play jazz unless like you have a certain criteria of knowledge or things like that, which is such bullshit to me. Jazz was meant to be inclusive. Jazz was meant to raise voices to those who didn't have one at the time, or so on and so forth. It just seems like contradictory to me, and that's a whole nother video about how jazz has been gentrified, but it really damaged that part of me because I felt really bad about myself. Again, I was like, why can't I, when it came to doing certain skills, you know, like ear training, I could do certain things, but like I think it was just because I didn't really care too much. Like that's not what I wanted to do. And, you know, I had some moments in high school where I had some good ups and downs. I feel like I was always very average, and it really messed with me because again I had this like big dream of, you know, wanting to be this famous singer and like wanting to be this person. And like while I still have that, I think now I've opened myself up creatively because I want to create things and use music to impact versus just like this one goal, because I think having that one dream like really has held me back from my true creativity and how I can bring music into those things. And even now I feel uncomfortable like almost admitting that like, oh, I'm more of a Renaissance woman. I actually want to like do more than one thing or incorporate music, kind of like Bo Burnham's Inside. But going back to the mental health aspect, I would like literally have a good time and then be thinking I didn't practice. Then I started to have experiences playing gigs where people were just either rude or I would get like weird misogynist comments, and men would be really nasty to me and weird. And this is like during college, and you know, outside of college performances, I didn't really do those. I just compared myself a lot because I wasn't like everyone else. I didn't, you know, I felt like an outcast. And I had some really amazing teachers. I had some really great experiences. Like I literally had this message from one of my old teachers printed out that she sent me because it literally was amazing. I'm gonna cry. Why? I had a lot of teachers that did believe in me, and I still do. But I think I would get in my own head about these ailments or things I didn't like do, right? And I remember, like I've always, you know, wanted to write songs, things like that, and I did. I was writing songs, things like that, and I just always felt like I wasn't quite there. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense. It always felt like I was just so mediocre. I didn't have anything special, and I feel like when you have even small experiences as a musician, that starts to happen. But there's a lot of things that you have to sacrifice, that or people tell you have to sacrifice in order to make it, or in order to like be a good sport. And part of that's like, oh, take every gig. Like, no. Do you know how damaging it can be to your self-worth if you take a gig that doesn't pay? It's crazy, right? And that's a whole nother thing too, talking about like that balance. How do we balance those two things? And so in college, I remember I went to a jazz jam, and I brought my real book, and I played the saxophone, and I lost the form. And no one was nice to me. I mean, there was somebody that was kind of nice, but he helped me get back to where we were supposed to be, but it almost seemed like it was like an irritation. But like all the other like college, or I don't know, some of these could have been high school kids, were just like rude. They were not nice. No one thanked me. And I remember I was like, I'm never doing that again. That was the worst. I know it wasn't like the scariest thing I've ever done musically. Like I've gotten in front of people and sang, and like that didn't feel good. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like an inclusive space, especially because I'm like, it's a jazz jam. Like jazz was not a prestigious, like it wasn't this like bougie fucking genre. So it makes no sense, right? And I remember I left and I called my boyfriend and I said, I sucked. Everyone thinks I suck. And I also sang that night. Yeah. And I remember like just feeling like I didn't impress my teacher. I totally ruined my reputation. And that's another thing, because it's like every time you have a bad performance, you think you ruin your reputation. So I was so obsessed with this like being local or whatever. And then my friend told me, stop thinking locally and start thinking globally. And that really weirdly helped me, because it kind of made me realize, oh yeah, there's more of a world out there than wherever you are locally. But I was still fighting kind of like this back and forth, because I still hadn't quote unquote made it. I hadn't really had much success. And I started to get better. And at one point, my boyfriend and I, who also has a jazz degree, were playing like every single weekend. And so I was getting really good. But, anytime I would go to the studio and record something, and if there's something wrong with it, it would mess with me forever. And there's like these small instances that I remember I did my cover of Phantom of the Opera. I asked my boyfriend for feedback, and he was like, oh, something's off or whatever. And I remember just having a breakdown, because I was like, I suck, blah, blah, and it wasn't even that bad. And I'm sure like some people would say, oh, you don't have thick skin, that's why. No, I feel like I've dealt with a lot of bullshit. I've dealt with a lot of it, but like sometimes it just hurts. And after a while, when you try so hard all the time and you're trying to make a living, if you're trying to make a living doing it, it can get really finicky, because you have to balance the two things. You have to balance the criticism along with like being able to trust yourself and believe in yourself. And I think it's unfair to say that you should create an environment like Whiplash that's crappy, because in reality, I feel like people thrive a lot more in environments they feel welcome in. And that's kind of, I think, I realized is the key, is as a musician, we have to balance. And I even think now, saying somebody who plays music, because when you're so heavily tied to this identity, it can really restrict you. And I remember my studio engineer telling me, like, you're too smart to just be a musician. And I'm not saying that like to my own horn or anything. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just kidding. But like that kind of made me realize, oh yeah, like it's not a bad thing that I do other things. Maybe this can actually help me. And I always said I learned more in the gym, or about music in the gym, than I do like even playing. But I feel like that's like a very short synopsis of my story. But I think my point is that because I was so tied to this identity, and I almost like doubled down to the point where I would shame myself, and I would feel so much guilt, and I just never felt good enough. I never felt like I had any self-worth, because my identity was so tied to being a musician, that anything that, were to hit it or hurt that pride would damage me and traumatize me in a weird way. But I think it's something we don't talk about. I think, again, we're told we have to have thick skin, or we're told, oh, like, oh, it's so fun, we love it. But like there's times where like it can really suck, and you're like there's so much rejection. And something that, shout out to Dr. K, Healthy Gamer on YouTube, he said that when it came to dating apps, humans aren't made for that much rejection. And I feel like that this ties in here heavily because of the fact that we're not made, I don't think we're made for that level of rejection or just like hate comments. And I don't really receive a lot of that. But I think a lot of it is self-work and self-worth. And I think we have to have it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this little synopsis and story. I plan on doing more in-depth videos and kind of start this as a series, kind of like, musician mental health or like creative self. I think just kind of the arts in general, and how to have a healthy relationship with the art form that you choose to engage in, and how to improve in a healthy way, how to, take criticism when is necessary, and knowing when, and also knowing when to not expose yourself to it, but also knowing sometimes it's just going to be damaging. But mostly, I think getting back to the core of why was it that I or we or whoever decided to engage in this specific art form like music? Why was it that I originally wanted to be a singer? What was it about that? Because it didn't matter at that moment whether or not I was good or the most amazing. It was just that I loved it. And I think through that love, I was able to get better. But eventually it was like I was almost holding myself back by trying to get better, because I was doing it with so much negative reinforcement, and psychologically that doesn't actually work. Yeah, so go ahead and I guess subscribe if you want to. I definitely want to engage in these conversations, so I would love for if there's any questions, or if anybody has any topic ideas in relation to kind of like music and the arts, mental health, self-worth, identity, and those types of things, because it's definitely something I'm really passionate about and something I want to continue to cultivate a community around. So yeah, anyway, thanks so much for being here, and I will talk to you guys later.